You got shot before.
Yeah.
Damn, bro. I always wanted to get shot.
Huh?
I always wanted to, just to feel what it, just in my leg or something. I never wanted to take something in the chest, you know?
Crazy, bro.
But I always wanted to
You gotta
feel.
be careful what you wish for, dog.
Yeah, maybe we'll take that part out, bro. That might be a lot.
No, leave it in there. But
All right.
you gotta go take it.
Some niggas go to jail because I swear they got nothing to lose. And some niggas go to jail because I swear they got something to prove. Some niggas go to jail because niggas dumb and they think that it's cool. Same niggas that can't make bail, man, them niggas in school, let me take you to school.
This is Prince McFarland, 37 years old, known in the streets as YPDAYG, a rapper from South Jamaica, Queens. On October 3rd, 2025, he was shot dead inside a family home by someone who had known him since they were children. And the reason why comes down to a single house and $600,000.
YP to YG, you already know, South Jamaica, Queens, Sufton Bullies, 5 block on, we all in gang.
Before we get into what happened that night, you need to know who Prince McFarland was, because the news stories covered this like he was just another body, and that is not the full picture. Prince grew up in Jamaica, Queens, specifically on the blocks around 5 Block and Sutphin Boulevard on the south side of the borough. That neighborhood shaped everything about him. He eventually moved to Brooklyn as an adult, but South Jamaica never left him, and he never tried to leave it behind. Every interview, every song, every shout-out pointed straight back to where he came from.
Man, who were you listening to growing up? How did you get into hip-hop?
My first artist that I listened to, or my first artist that I gravitated to?
How did you discover hip-hop? What was the first?
Eminem.
Eminem was when you discovered hip-hop?
Eminem's my favorite rapper.
He went by YPDAYG and also by Big Queens, and his name YPDAYG had a story behind it. When he first came up, his whole crew went by YGs before the clothing brand We All In existed. Once name conflicts came up in the music business, his friend and business partner Chris changed the brand name, but Prince held on to the YG because that name had been his since he was 16.
Killer Prince, and he said, your name... Yo, I fucking love Chris. And nigga said, your name is what? Killer Prince. He said, you ain't never killed nobody on the block before. I swear, he said that shit. I will never forget these conversations. Certain conversations with Chris that just make sense to me. You see what I'm saying? And like the older I got, it was like, yo, that shit really made sense. He said, no, your name is gonna be Young Prince. I said, Young Prince? He said, matter of fact, your name is YP. Because it was YG Dawn, it was YG Serve, it was YG Chris, Dex, and all. So I didn't like the way YG sound. And I ain't like the way YP sound. So he said, nah, you YP, do YG. And nigga, that shit stuck with me since I was 16, nigga.
He started rapping in jail, battling for commissary at 17 years old, and by the time he came home, he was already sharper than most people around him.
I'm a performer. I know how to perform. I know how to engage in the crowd. I don't stay on the stage. I jump in that motherfucker, bro. Like, I'm being real with you. Like, I like to perform. That's why my videos be, man, animated. How? Oh, you see my facial expressions. Like, no, I like to perform. People be too cool to be expressive. Yeah. Like, to be them. No, I'm an entertainer, nigga. I like to
He released his debut album, Reloaded, in 2019, and followed it up with projects like From a Prince to a King, and singles like Two Steppin', Keepin' It Supfin', and Me, Myself, and I, which he said was the most personal song he ever made. He had over 3,700 followers on Instagram, and every one of those was built with no label, cosign, or shortcut.
Dress niggas with headshots like an ID. I'm back, nigga. Still shitting on niggas like cat litter. Someone give me a noose. I'm that nigga. Bar for bar, homie, I'm willing to scrap with you. I ain't talking URL when I say that I smack niggas.
What made Prince different from a lot of guys coming up in the underground was that music was not his only thing. He had real knowledge in real estate. He understood how property deals worked, how to read contracts and get a transaction across the finish line. That was a skill that made him a trusted person. People came to him when they needed help with property because they knew he understood the business. He was also known for going out and getting what he wanted rather than waiting for it to come to him. Photos with 50 Cent, connections to Nicki Minaj, appearances on major platforms. None of that fell in his lap. He chased it himself.
Nobody plugged me in with none of the people you see me with. From Drewski to Magic to Self to 50 Cent Tycoon Party. No, I was running down. I seen fucking, I had a nigga named Hef. I said, yo, Hef, what's up? He said, yo, I want to do the Riding Out DJ Magic. He said, yo, you know he charged for it. I don't care. Paid him for it. Boom. Got it done. Seen DJ Self in the club. Yo, what's up? Yo, I want to get you in my video clip for two-stepping. All right, come on. Go to the... I thought 50 ain't know who I was. 50 knew who I was. Let me tell you how.
Get the fuck out, yo.
I put
yo,
Nah,
50
you-
be watching Southside.
I follow
50 be
you on
watching.
Instagram, and you're right, 100% right. He was
I'm
with
gonna
him.
tell you why.
He
50
was
be
with
watching.
him.
I swear to God. 50 was like, it's mad people asking. It's this brolic Spanish nigga with 50, like brolic Spanish nigga with a bed. So a lot of people asking 50 for pictures, and he's saying no, like nah, I'm chilling, like nah. So the Spanish nigga like no. So 50 on his way, like going to a different part of the VIP in the Tycoon balcony. The nigga looked at me and said, "What's up?" So I said, "What's up?" He said, "You ain't gonna ask for the picture?" I said, "Hell yeah!" That's why when you see me take the picture with 50, it caught me off guard. That's why I'm smiling so hard in the picture.
Now, on the other side of this story is a 41-year-old man referred to in reporting as Antoine, a relative of Prince's who had control over a family property in South Jamaica. The exact relationship between the two has been reported differently depending on the source. PIX11 and a number of other news outlets identified them as nephew and uncle, with Antoine being the nephew and Prince, at 37, being the older uncle. The New York Post called them cousins. The age gap might seem strange, a nephew who is 4 years older than his uncle, but in extended families where there are big age differences across generations, that happens more than people think. What everyone agrees on is that these two men had known each other their whole lives and grew up together. Antoine owned or controlled a two-story house at 155-116th Road in Jamaica, Queens. That property had been in the McFarland family since January of 2006, originally purchased for $300,000 by a family member named Tyra McFarland. By 2025, nearly 20 years later, the property had grown in value to $613,000. That is what happens to homes in neighborhoods like South Jamaica when the city changes around them and prices go up. Antoine decided it was time to sell, and because Prince knew real estate, Antoine gave him power of attorney to handle the sale. That is a legal document that gives another person the authority to make decisions and sign papers on your behalf. It made sense at the time. The house was listed in July of 2025 for $620,000 and eventually adjusted down to $599,999 by late August. A buyer came through and the deal went pending, which means the sale was basically done. All that was left was to close it out and divide the money. That is where everything fell apart. The argument between Prince McFarland and Antoine was not about whether to sell the house. Both of them already agreed on that. What they could not agree on was how the money from the sale was going to be divided between the people in the family who felt they had a claim to it. That kind of disagreement sounds simple when you describe it out loud, but when you put real money behind it and a long family history, it can get very ugly very fast. To understand just how far that kind of thing can go, look at what happened just over a year earlier in Syosset, Long Island, about 30 miles from Queens. In August of 2024, a 59-year-old man named Joseph DeLucia Jr. shot and killed 4 family members inside their late mother's home and then shot himself because the family had come together to sell the house after their mother died, and he couldn't accept having to leave the only home he'd ever lived in. He was not even being cut out of the money. He was still supposed to get an equal share of the sale. But the fear of losing the house, combined with grief and stress, pushed him somewhere that could not be pulled back. The Nassau County Police Commissioner described the scene as one of the most horrific he had ever seen in his career. That case is not the same as what happened to Prince, but the pattern underneath it is. These situations are not rare, and the consequences when they go wrong are permanent. Back in Queens, as the closing date on the house got closer, the argument between Prince and Antoine became more serious. The details of exactly what was said between them and when things got really bad are not fully known from the reporting, but what we do know is that by the evening of October 3rd, 2025, Prince was inside that house on 116th Road, and he had been there long enough that the people who loved him started to worry. His wife tried to reach him that day and could not get through. Then he missed something that he would not normally miss. He did not pick up his daughter from school, and that was not like him. She tracked his phone, found out he was at the family property, and then called the NYPD to go check on him. Officers went to the house, but without permission from someone inside, they had no legal right to enter. They left. Whatever was happening inside that house during those hours, nobody on the outside could get to him. Then, at around 11:45 that night, a call came in to the NYPD reporting shots fired at the house on 116th Road near 155th Street in South Jamaica. Officers arrived and found Prince McFarland on the ground near the front door, dead from a single gunshot wound to the head. Antoine was found upstairs, alive but with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Emergency services rushed him to Jamaica Hospital Medical Center, but he died from his injuries shortly after. A handgun was found at the scene. What made this even harder to process was how the bodies were discovered. A 62-year-old uncle who lived in the basement of that same house had let Prince's wife into the property when she came to the door. As the two of them were walking out of the house after going inside, they heard the final gunshot go off from upstairs. That means Antoine was still alive in that house when Prince's wife walked in, and he made his final decision while she was there. There are people across the internet who looked at this story and immediately started asking why Prince did not see it coming, or why he kept going back to that house when tensions were clearly high. And look, those questions are understandable. But the reality is that Prince was not dealing with a stranger. He was dealing with family, someone he had grown up with his whole life, someone he trusted enough to accept legal authority over their property. When you have known someone your entire life, the idea that they would actually pull a trigger on you is not something your brain prepares you for, because it has never happened before in all those years you have known them. When the NYPD responded to the scene that night and began their investigation, the picture came together quickly. They classified the case as a murder unaliving and made clear that no additional suspects were being looked at. The physical evidence at the scene was consistent with what family members and witnesses had already told them. Prince was shot first, Antoine then shot himself, and no one else was involved in what happened inside that house. The NYPD's Emergency Services Unit confirmed the murder unaliving classification, and the case was closed with no charges filed, because the only person responsible for the shooting was already dead. What was left for the world to see was Prince's body of work and the tributes that came pouring in once the news spread.
Myself and I.
That's my shit. When that's in my workout playlist, B. That shit is so fire.
My
to me,
favorite
like,
song I've ever done.
Why though?
Because I was going through some hard shit, and when I felt like I had people with me, and when you turn around, it was nobody there, bro. And it was like, yo, damn, like all I really got is me. Like I don't have nobody. Like I was going through some shit at that time, bro, and that song is my most personal.
You was in your feelings when you made that song.
Hell
All
yeah,
I got
that
is me.
All I got is
Do
me.
that shit.
Myself already know. I had a talk with I was speaking from the soul. He said, please listen to me, because who else could you call? You know I'm always here.
Friends and people who had known him described him as someone who was dedicated to his daughters, loyal to the people around him, and genuinely humble no matter how much he was grinding. He was not famous in the way people usually mean when they say that word, but in his community he was known and he was respected, and those two things are not always easy to get at the same time. He had 13 unreleased songs sitting in storage at the time of his death. He had been working with his team on the right approach to finally dropping a full album, with the plan being to put singles out first to build momentum and then release the project on top of that energy. He had songs rotating on Hot 97 with DJ Magic. He had a remix out with Kaya Baby and Piff Montana. His single Two Steppin' had real traction. He was not at the top of any chart, but he was building something that felt real, the kind of foundation that takes years to put together when you're doing it on your own without a machine behind you.
Bro, I got 13 unreleased songs. I tell my nigga Grease I want to drop an album. He keep telling me just drop singles first. He said get your single out there first and then drop the album. You don't want to drop an album and then it's still like
That's
it's
a fact.
unheard music.
That's a fact.
So that's why I came back out with Still Two Steppin'.
No doubt, no doubt.
Because Two Steppin' is where it started.
Yeah.
And Still Two Steppin' is like, nah, nigga, I'm still two stepping.
That album never came. Those 13 songs are still sitting somewhere. His music is available on Spotify and Apple Music. His videos are still on YouTube, and his Instagram is still up. But there is nothing new coming. And that's the part that sits heavy when you think about how close he was to putting it all together. Because when you're building something from nothing, every small win means more. Every stream, every repost, every person who actually listens. Those aren't numbers, they're proof that what you're doing is real. And Prince understood that better than most. He wasn't chasing overnight fame. He was building something that could last. He treated music the same way he treated real estate, like an investment. Not just money, but time, reputation, and relationships. He knew that one wrong move could set you back, but one smart move could change everything. That mindset is what made people trust him, both in business and in life. And that's what makes this story hit harder. Because he wasn't reckless, he wasn't lost. He was actually doing things the right way. Slow, steady, and intentional. The kind of path that doesn't always get attention at first, but usually wins in the long run. He had plans. Not just vague dreams, but real steps lined up. Music releases, collaborations, business moves. Everything was building towards something bigger. You can see it when you look at the unreleased songs, the connections he was making, the consistency in his work. But sometimes it's not the outside world that stops you. It's what's closest to you. And in this case, the same foundation he was trying to build. But sometimes it's not the outside world that stops you. It's what's closest to you. And in this case, the same foundation he was trying to build from, family, property, legacy, ended up being the thing that destroyed everything. Because when money enters a family situation, it changes the way people see each other. What used to be trust slowly turns into suspicion. Conversations that should be simple become tense, and things that were never said out loud before start coming to the surface. And that's exactly what happened here. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't something that came out of nowhere in a single moment. This was pressure building over time, quiet disagreements, different expectations, people believing they deserved more, or feeling like they were being cut out of something that belonged to them. And when you mix that with history, years of knowing each other, growing up together, shared memories, it doesn't make things easier. It actually makes it heavier. Because now it's not just about money. It's about respect. It's about pride. It's about who feels valued and who doesn't. By the time everything reached that night, the situation was already past the point of a simple conversation. And that's the part people don't always see when they look at cases like this. They see the final moment, but not everything that led up to it. Inside that house, there were no headlines, no cameras, no outside perspective, just two people, a lifetime of history between them, and a disagreement that had gone too far. And in situations like that, it only takes one decision, one irreversible moment to change everything. What makes it even harder is what came after. Because once something like this happens, there's no resolution, no fixing it, no second chance to go back and handle things differently. The money doesn't matter anymore. The property doesn't matter anymore. Everything that caused the conflict becomes meaningless compared to what was lost. And what's left behind isn't just silence, it's impact. A family that has to live with what happened, children growing up without a father, plans that were in motion suddenly frozen in time, music that will never be released the way it was intended, conversations that will never happen. That's the real ending of this story. Not the gunshot, not the headlines, but everything that continues after for the people who are still here trying to make sense of something that never should have happened in the first place. The property at the center of this story was bought for $300,000 in 2006 and had grown to be worth more than $600,000 by the time the family decided to sell it. What do you think of this heinous crime? Have you ever been in a similar situation before? Let me know in the comments section. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this. See you in the next one.